Stay tuned for a short program about compressed natural gas vehicles.
You've probably heard us talk about alternative fuel vehicles in the past. In fact, you may even remember that from 1992 until 1996, Ram Van with the 5.2-liter engine was available with a factory-supplied compressed natural gas fuel system, or CNG. Well, for 1999, CNG is back and available on Ram Van and Wagon as well. CNG will be optional on all 2500 and 3500 series vans with the 5.2-liter engine. You'll also find it as an option on the 8-passenger wagon, the 12-passenger maxi wagon, and the late introduction 15-passenger maxi wagon, all with the 5.2-liter engine. If you're already familiar with CNG, you'll notice that this system is similar to the system used in the past. In fact, it's also similar to the gas-powered vehicles that you work on every day. And working on a CNG fuel system is safe, providing you follow the various safety precautions which we'll be discussing a little later. The purpose of this segment is to familiarize you with the components and operation of a CNG fuel system. In addition, we'll be highlighting various diagnostic features and service issues. We'll also show you where you can access additional information. To begin, there are a number of ways of identifying a CNG Ram van or wagon without looking under the vehicle. First, at the rear of the vehicle, look for labels on the lower right and left-hand corners, and a label on the lower left-hand side of the vehicle, which indicates the location of the manual shutoff valve. Labels not as visible include a warning label under the hood that describes various safety precautions that should be followed, and 2 fuel fill door labels. The upper label specifies the first inspection date and expiration date of the cylinders, which, by the way, is 15 years from the date of manufacture. The lower label specifies the correct filler nozzle to use. If you've taken the compressed natural gas training class, course number 0840708, then you've seen a CNG fuel system before. For those who haven't, and as a reminder for those who have, let's take a look at the components and operation of a CNG fuel system. First, you'll notice that the fuel fill receptacle looks completely different from the fuel filler used on a gasoline fuel system. The protective cap helps to keep dirt from entering the system. The receptacle contains an upstream fuel filter to screen out impurities and an integrated primary one-way check valve which keeps fuel from escaping from the fuel fill receptacle. The fuel fill receptacle is connected to high-pressure tubing. This tubing also contains a secondary one-way check valve which is mounted to the inboard side of the left frame rail. A red-handled quarter-turn manual shutoff valve is used to isolate the cylinders from the rest of the fuel system during service. Speaking of which, now 4 fuel cylinders or containers, as described in the CNG Owner's Manual Supplement, are standard equipment. 2 are positioned under the driver's side of the vehicle, while 2 are mounted behind the rear axle under the vehicle. A shield is used to protect the cylinders. Each fuel cylinder has its own black-handled multi-turn shutoff valve, which is used to stop fuel flow from the cylinder for servicing the fuel lines and fittings. Each cylinder also has a pressure relief device that automatically opens if the temperature rises above 217 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep in mind that once pressure is released, the device will need to be replaced and the cylinder re-inspected. The fuel gauge pressure sensor is located on the outboard side fuel cylinder. It converts the high pressure of the gas to an equivalent resistance of between 20 to 220 ohms. It then sends this signal to the powertrain control module, or PCM. From there, the PCM converts it and sends fuel level information to the smart cluster. In a CNG fuel system, the fuel pressure regulator is not part of the fuel rail, as it is on some gasoline engines. The fuel pressure regulator, mounted to the fuel cylinder support bracket, is located above the side fuel cylinders. Fuel pressure from the cylinders is 3,600 psi. The fuel pressure regulator lowers this pressure to 120 psi for use by the engine. A high-pressure fuel shutoff solenoid turns fuel flow to the regulator on or off. A relay in the power distribution center controls the operation of the high-pressure fuel shutoff solenoid, and the PCM controls the relay. A high-pressure tube delivers fuel to the fuel pressure regulator, and the two-part low-pressure fuel line sends it to the engine. Remember, when servicing the low-pressure fuel line O-ring, a fine coating of 5W30 or 10W30 motor oil is required before reassembling. Do not use any other lubricant, as it could cause the O-ring to expand. In the event that too much pressure builds up within the regulator, there's a safety device to relieve the pressure. If pressure reaches 255 psi on the low pressure side of the regulator, pressure will be released to the atmosphere through a pressure relief discharge tube. An integral fuel filter stops small particles from entering the regulator. It has twice the surface area of the filter used in the past for longer life and is now replaceable. The fuel pressure regulator also has two coolant hoses that connect it to the engine cooling system. Engine coolant is used to warm the regulator, helping to prevent freeze-up in colder temperatures. In the engine compartment, the fuel rail is unique to CNG vehicles and includes a fuel temperature sensor, which is used to communicate fuel temperature to the PCM, a low fuel pressure sensor, which communicates fuel pressure measurements in the fuel rail to the PCM, and a low-pressure fuel shutoff solenoid, which turns fuel flow to the fuel rail on or off. When the engine is shut off, the low-pressure fuel shutoff solenoid blocks fuel between the fuel rail and regulator in order to minimize leak down in case of leaky injectors. Speaking of injectors, you'll notice that the injector housings on an engine that uses CNG are blue. Keep in mind that these injectors are not interchangeable with those used on gasoline engines. Always be sure you're using the correct replacement part by checking the part number. The 5.2-liter engine used with the CNG fuel system has had a few upgrades that you should be aware of. First, the intake valve stems are chrome-plated for durability. Both the intake and exhaust valve stems use valve stem seals. And exhaust valve seat inserts are used. If they're ever damaged, you'll need to replace the cylinder head. The PCM used in a CNG system is unique, with distinct calibrations and additional inputs and outputs for CNG operation. Inputs include the low fuel pressure sensor and fuel temperature sensor, while outputs include the low pressure fuel shutoff solenoid, high pressure fuel shutoff solenoid, and high pressure fuel shutoff solenoid relay. Looking at the emission control system, CNG Ram vans and wagons are OBD compliant, and in fact run some of the same monitors as conventional gasoline systems. Diagnostic trouble codes have been added for the temperature sensor and pressure sensor. Finally, because compressed natural gas uses a sealed system, you'll notice that no evap canister or evap purge solenoid is used. For additional emissions-related information, refer to the 1999 Ram Van and Wagon Service Manual, number 81-370-9107. Before we look at diagnosing and servicing a CNG fuel system, there are certain operating characteristics of these vehicles that are normal and that you need to be aware of. For instance, when a vehicle has been parked overnight, at the first key on, a sound similar to a bark may be heard. This sound is coming from the high-pressure fuel shutoff solenoid and is normal. Sometimes during moderate or full throttle, a hissing sound may be heard, which is caused by the change in pressure from the high-pressure side of the regulator to the low-pressure side of the regulator. Finally, you may hear a clicking sound coming from the injectors. Because CNG is in a gaseous state at all times, there is no liquid fuel running through the system to absorb the noise. When it's time to diagnose a CNG fuel system, Keep in mind that diagnostics are very similar to those for gas-powered vehicles. The DRB3 will recognize the vehicle as having a CNG fuel system. Diagnostic information can be found in the 1999 Ram Van Wagon CNG Service Manual Supplement, number 81-370-9107A. And remember, working on CNG fuel systems is perfectly safe as long as simple safety precautions are followed. Remember that CNG collects in high areas, so always work in a well-ventilated area. Because CNG is a high-pressure system, always purge the part of the system that you'll be servicing before working on it. Never modify or weld fuel system components. You should never undercoat or paint fuel system components. Be sure to keep the vehicle away from flames or excessive heat, and never use a paint oven to cure any paint repairs made to the vehicle. For additional warnings and cautions, refer to Group 14 of the 1999 Ram Van Wagon CNG Service Manual Supplement. Before you can service the fuel system of a CNG-powered vehicle, the part of the system that you're working on will need to be purged of fuel. For instance, if you're servicing the fuel rail, the fuel tubes will need to be purged, while if it's the cylinders that are being serviced, they'll have to be purged. Not only are there separate procedures for purging fuel tubes and cylinders, but procedures will also vary according to whether or not the engine will run. For more information about purging the fuel system, refer to the 1999 Ram Van Wagon CNG Service Manual Supplement. In order to maintain the fuel system on vehicles with compressed natural gas, there are some maintenance procedures that should be performed periodically. First, it's important that the cylinders be re-inspected at an approved test site every 3 years or 36,000 miles, whichever comes first. A reminder to do this is printed on the cylinder label. The inspection date must be marked on each cylinder near the original test date. Fuel system components should be inspected for excessive wear and replaced as needed. Also, ensure there is enough clearance between the rear brake line and rear cylinder tube. Inspect for loose or disconnected wire connectors, and be sure to follow up on any indications of leaking gas. To isolate a gas leak, apply either liquid leak detector or a soapy solution to the area. If there is a leak, the solution will bubble. Finally, check the fuel tube high-pressure fittings for proper tightening. You'll want to do this using a go, no-go gauge. This is especially important to do after the fittings have been replaced. For additional service issues and procedures, refer to the 1999 Ram Van Wagon CNG Service Manual Supplement. Well, that concludes our look at servicing vehicles with compressed natural gas fuel systems. If you need additional assistance, remember you can always call the Star Center hotline at 1-800-850-STAR. Join us again next month when we'll be taking a close look at the SPEC 3A powertrain control module.